Morning, everyone in Europe. Good afternoon to everyone in Asia. Welcome to today's webinar on EU ETS and the Innovation Fund, and really accessing this question on how accessing public support for decarbonizing shipping. I would like to start by thanking our co-organizers, Transport Environment, where we have Jacob Armstrong, who will be speaking here. I'm very much looking forward to doing this together with you. Also very much thank you our speakers who will be joining us today. So in addition to Jacob, it's Tim Noël from DG Clima, Rune Holmen from Enova, and Billesø from DFDS. We'll hear from them later on today. My name is Kasper Søgaard. I'm a managing director at the Global Maritime Forum, the managing organization of the Getting to Zero Coalition, and I will be moderating today's webinar. And also a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. I think it's a really important topic on how we can find ways of overcoming the price gap between zero-emission ships and fuels and the existing fuels, and how public support can help accelerate this development. Let me start by introducing the Getting to Zero Coalition. The Getting to Zero Coalition was launched in 2019 at the UN Climate Action Summit, uniting around 50 companies around the goal to have commercially viable zero-emission ships in deep sea operation by 2030, supported by the necessary fuel production and bunkering infrastructure. Today, the coalition counts over 200 members that also signed up to the ambition of full decarbonization of international shipping by 2050. Furthermore, we as the coalition have set a breakthrough target of reaching 5% scalable zero-emission fuels by 2030. Reaching 5% zero-emission fuels is seen as kind of this tipping point, an inflection point where we have gone through what we typically call the emergent phase, where we test technologies and we improve them and we drive down that cost so they become accessible also on commercial basis for the wider market. And I think reaching this 5% goal is really, really critical to have collaboration across the full value chain, also including the public sector. Because we know that the key barrier to having these new fuels in operation is the price gap. And one of the ways of reducing the price gap, we know from innovation policy from other sectors, we've seen this in renewables, but also elsewhere, is that the first generation of technologies are typically less efficient than the next generations, and they're typically more costly. And this means that the first movers tend to be at a disadvantage. And while their efforts are incredibly important, the benefits of innovation goes to society and not only to the company that's involved in this. And this is basically the rationale for innovation policy and why there's a role for governments to help support this, to get that amount of innovation that we need to overcome those challenges. And I think dealing with a global challenge such as climate change, this is really where the case for innovation policy is at its peak. So what we'll do today is that we'll dive into what some of those mechanisms are and what the latest developments, both at the EU level, where we have seen the adoption of the EU ETS, which will help close some of the price gap, but which will also raise funds for innovation, but also at the national level, because we see a lot of national governments also being very active in supporting the decarbonization of shipping. We recently released a mapping of pilot projects, and we identified more than 370 projects all over the world. And for more than 40% of those projects, there was some kind of public sector support. We believe that actually the real number is probably higher, but in certain geographies, it's less transparent how governments support this. But at least in Europe, we know that this is opaque and that this is quite clear. And we see that a lot of those projects have been supported by European governments or by the European Commission. So there's already a strong tradition to build on. And I think it's fair to say that the European Union, as well as the member states, have been a global leader for the decarbonization of international shipping. So while the EU ETS focuses on reducing the industry's carbon emissions by obliging companies to hold a permit for each ton of carbon contribute directly to closing the fuel gap, the revenues from the system will also flow towards member states, as well as to the dedicated innovation fund, in which money is also earmarked for shipping specifically. And I think this is a big win for all maritime stakeholders that the Commission and the member states and the European Parliament agreed to earmark money for shipping decarbonization, because we know, compared to many other industries, that shipping is a harder to abate sector and the abatement costs are higher than compared, for instance, to power generation. So having those support schemes earmarked for shipping is an important signal that the decarbonization of shipping is also a political priority. In today's webinar, we'll zoom in on the EU ETS, we'll zoom in on national funding, as well as on the Innovation Fund and what this looks like and how they can contribute to fostering zero-emission shipping. To start, we'll have a presentation by Transport Environment diving into the Innovation Fund. After this, we'll have a presentation by Norwegian Enova focusing on national funding and how national governments are also supporting the transition. And then we will have a panel discussion that will zoom in further on the potential and uncertainties around the Innovation Fund, and also share some concrete experiences from trying to access public funding. And just not to give away all of the points, it's not always easy, and you need to dedicate enough resources to handle this in a professional manner. But if you do, there are definitely opportunities out there. We encourage you to post your questions in the chat, and if we don't get the answer all of your questions during the webinar, we will follow up with you afterwards. The webinar will also be recorded and shared on our Global Maritime Forum YouTube channel, and you will also receive the slides. So if you have colleagues that you think this would be interesting for, you will have access to the recording afterwards. Next up, I'd like to give the floor to Jacob Armstrong. He's a Sustainable Shipping Officer at Transport Environment. Jacob joined TNE in 2021 after working as a policy officer at various European associations for maritime and seaports, where he dealt with legislation relating to the European Green Deal, energy, and blue growth. So Jacob, I think you're ideally suited to take us through the intricacies of the Innovation Fund and how we can use it to accelerate the decarbonization of shipping. The floor is yours, Jacob.
Thank you so much, Kasper. Hello, everyone. I will now share my screen. So can I just double check, Kasper, with a thumbs up that that's okay? You can see that? Perfect. So hi, everyone. So I'm Jacob Armstrong from Transport and Environment. We're really pleased to be co-organizing this webinar with the Global Maritime Forum, looking into the funding schemes from the EU ETS. So I'm going to give a little bit of the general context and then look at the relevance for shipping. So to start with, the obvious context is obviously the EU ETS. Okay, so we had the political agreement on the EU ETS at the beginning of this year, really landmark agreement, especially in terms of bringing shipping into the carbon market. But the important thing about the ETS is it is not going to lead to decarbonisation across different sectors. Part of the reason is because abatement costs vary. Okay, so in the power sector, the necessary carbon price you need to green that sector is quite low because you have very strong competition from renewables like wind and solar. But in shipping, we don't have this. So the IMO fourth greenhouse gas study estimated that the necessary carbon price might actually be around 400 euros per ton of carbon dioxide, or even higher, right? So this is a lot higher than the carbon price we have in the ETS, which is hovering around 90 euros per ton of carbon. And crucially, that is not going to make clean fuels, these sustainable and scalable fuels based on hydrogen, competitive compared to conventional fuels. So that is why the European Commission and the co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council, proposed to subsidize the hydrogen industry with the ETS revenues. And they're going to do it through the Innovation Fund. So the Innovation Fund is where ETS revenues go. And broadly, there's a couple of important funding streams that I'm going to mention today. First one is the Innovation Fund in itself, right? It's quite big. It's just below 600 million EU allowances, okay? And in EU allowances is basically a ton of carbon. So at a carbon price of around 75 to 100 euros, that more or less 600 million allowances translate to about between 40 and 60 billion euros, so a lot of money. And of course, as Kasper mentioned, there is going to be an earmarking for shipping. So again, landmark decision, and that's going to be 20 million tons of carbon until 2030. So just under 2 billion euros. And the important thing, which I'm going to talk about later on as well, is as part of the Innovation Fund, the Commission has proposed this hydrogen support scheme. So this pilot project is going to come out in December of this year, and it's going to be 800 million euros for hydrogen production. And we're going to go into it a little bit more in a second. And there you can see this. I think the caveat here is that shipping companies will be allowed to apply for the Innovation Fund and probably should be encouraged to do so, because the Innovation Fund is really massive, really important. However, they do have this special envelope. And the key thing, I think, which the key piece of context, is that the Innovation Fund is moving from before, where it just funded capital expenditure, to moving towards funding operational costs. Okay, so this is really interesting and I think a real opportunity for the shipping sector. And I'm going to mention a little bit more in detail in the next couple of slides the different ways that the Commission has proposed to subsidize those operational costs. Okay, the first one is fixed premiums. Then you have contracts for difference and carbon contracts for difference, which are very different between the two of them. So to go a little bit more into detail there about fixed premiums, okay? Fixed premiums are really the simplest type way of subsidizing operational costs, because it's just this constant rate of subsidy for every kilogram or every ton of carbon of hydrogen produced or deployed. So it doesn't take into account any other factor, for example, the fuel price or the carbon price, hence why it stays the same. So the way that that subsidy would be calculated is the shipping companies or the hydrogen producers would estimate the differences in their costs between the conventional fuel, conventional hydrogen, and the green hydrogen. And they would estimate that difference, what they need to be able to produce the green hydrogen, auction that to the commission, and the commission will choose the best bids, the cheapest bids. And basically for the 10 years of that contract, that will be the subsidy that those companies receive. The aim really of the fixed premiums is to kickstart the green hydrogen market. So again, we're focusing here on hydrogen production, okay, supply side. So we're not looking at offtake as yet. And the context here is that this 800 million euros pilot project that I mentioned in the previous slide, it is going to be done through fixed premiums, okay, so not through contracts for difference or carbon contracts for difference. And again, it's about making this green hydrogen market a reality and responding to the US IRA, which basically does the same thing, a constant rate. So that's fixed premiums. But then you do have these other options, which the Commission have said that they're going to consider for the next years, for the next rounds of subsidies, and potentially could be considered for the shipping envelope as well. So we have carbon contracts for difference and contracts for difference. Again, they're a bit different, and I'm mainly going to speak about contracts for difference. But the real theory here is that, as Kasper said, the reason we don't have green fuels is that cost gap between green fuels and conventional fuels is too big. The idea is to take that and subsidize it. Maybe not subsidize all of it, but subsidize the amount of it. And then what these contracts for difference would do is that the size of the subsidy actually changes as the different costs of the conventional fuels and the green fuels change. So how contracts for difference work in practice, as I say, more complicated administratively because it's not just a constant rate and then you go on. You hedge against the fuel price of contract for difference. Okay, you monitor the fuel price. For example, you would look at the bunker price in Rotterdam, and that would be the kind of the reference price for which the subsidy is set. So as that price goes up and down, the size of your subsidy changes. Again, it's paid out per every ton or kilogram of hydrogen. And in shipping's case, the two different costs you're looking at, as I said, probably bunker price, VLSFO or HFO, and then you'd look at a green fuel, maybe green hydrogen, maybe green ammonia, maybe e-methanol. So here you can see a visual representation. As you can see, a little bit more complicated. The idea is that the size of the subsidy changes. And the really why it's interesting for the public authority is that if the reference price, right, so this price of conventional fuels goes above the price of your clean fuel, then the company deploying or producing the hydrogen would actually pay back to the public authority. Okay, so that's why it's interesting. It creates this level playing field. So now looking into the shipping envelope and winding up. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, what do we have in the shipping envelope? We have 20 million allowances, which translate roughly to about 300 million euros per year. So it's a lot of money, but not enough to green the sector. So we actually looked at this, how much money would you need to have all fuels used in the EU green by 2030? You need a lot of money, right? It's about 300 billion euros. Okay, how much money would you need if you just want this magic number of 5% of fuels used in the EU to be green in 2030? It's about 13 billion. Okay, so it's still a lot of money, and it's more than we have in the shipping envelope. So shipping envelope can only really make 15% of that 13 billion number. So it's not enough. And of course, that's assuming no money goes to infrastructure. So the question is, investment must be targeted. And the elephant in the room here, and I think this is what we need to think about, is, as Kasper laid out beautifully, we're talking about innovation policy, but the elephant in the room is the importance of other mechanisms, especially command and control, which create this lovely level playing field, which means everyone has to do the same thing and gets everything going. So that's pretty much it. And I just wanted to leave the presentation with a couple of questions. So that's kind of the general context, but what is needed in shipping? Is it supporting early technology development, just a couple of projects? Is it guaranteeing new fuels? Is it attracting private investment? Maybe here the issue is the subsidy shouldn't cover all of the cost gap. no, but maybe less, 70%, 50%, and attract private capital to cover the rest of the green premium? Do we need something for smaller companies or smaller for projects where technology can be tested? And what role should we give to infrastructure? Do we need just to ensure the demand, and then the infrastructure is often a kind of result of that? So these are the questions I want to leave with today. Very, very interested in particular to hearing Enova, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacob. And again, if you have questions to Jacob around the EU Innovation Fund, feel free to put your questions in the chat. I think also Tim will also be able to answer some of those. So don't hesitate. Just put your questions in. That's the only way of getting them answered. And I think, Jacob, I think this provides a really, really good segue to the next presentation, because I think Rune Holmen from Enova, I think what Enova has done is to really think about how you want to spend the money to maximize the impact and have that target support. So I'm very excited to hear about the work you're doing and how you're looking to support shipping. Enova is a Norwegian state enterprise owned by the Ministry of Climate and Environment, focusing on the shift towards more environmentally friendly energy consumption and production. And I think what we saw from our pilot project mapping, Norway was one of the countries where the most pilot projects take place and where there is the most support from government and other sources. So I think it's fair to say that Norway and Enova is one of the front runners in shaping this transition. Rune Holmen is the head of maritime transport in Enova, and I think we're very excited to hear you share some of your insights. You're involved in the development and operation of financial support schemes for reducing climate gas emissions. And prior to taking on this role, you've been active in the energy and technology sector for over 20 years and holds an MBA in technology, innovation, and change management. So over to you, Rune.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction. Yes, I'm Rune Holmen. I'm heading the team that are working with maritime transport in Enova. We are 8 people in total. So I'll tell you a little bit about Enova, and I will go a bit deeper into some of the projects that we have been supporting. So what we are doing in Enova, as you know, as said, we are providing financial support, and we are in many ways stuck between the politicians. They are looking at the market failures, externalities like the positive externality, as we heard about, not enough R&D being performed for the society as large, since the companies they see spillover, they lose some of their R&D, and there are also negative externalities and networks effects externalities. The first producer of hydrogen is more expensive than what the next one will be, and the later one will be when the market is up and running. And that is what the Ministry of Climate and Environment, our owner, are looking at. But the market, on the other hand, they see that the projects are not profitable. There are barriers from doing this, and they are in many ways connected to the right relationship between risks and profitability. We support late-stage technology development, as we call it, and early market introduction. That is, we try to kickstart the market. We are not able to make Norway low emission society, because we need, after our support, we need some regulations, that is laws, CO2 taxes, or other regulatory instruments. But we are in a phase where we just kickstart the market and then we pull out. Last year, we spent something like less than 500 million euros. I'll give some figures in NOK, which are million Norwegian kroners, and due to latest drop in the Norwegian kroners, you have to divide it by 12, 11, 12, something like that to get the figure. We cover the whole economy in Norway, and we have something like 28 schemes, support schemes. We don't look that much at the tons of CO2 that we are avoiding, because since we are just kickstarting the market, we are more concerned about what the changes in the market that we are making, are going to lead to in the future. On the maritime side, we spend around 150 million euros, supported 180 projects. In total, we have supported over 570 vessels, in addition to shoreside electricity projects since 2015, and most of them are hybrid vessels, battery vessels. There have been an enormous change in the value chain there from the first projects, which were more or less science fiction, to the situation we are now in Norway, where it's possible to buy battery solutions for all the segments in the shipping industry. We are also looking at the amount of private capital that we raise, and we only count those innovation projects when we find this figure. And I guess that it is about 60–70% of the money that is allocated to our innovation projects are from private capital. That is a quite interesting KPI for us. But batteries have been the large volume of projects, but we see that the interest for ammonia and hydrogen is increasing quite rapidly. We have just supported 16 larger ships so far with hydrogen and ammonia. None of them are sailing yet. We are a bit concerned because when we gave our grants, the market was different. The costs are increasing, and we are hoping that as many as possible of these projects will be realized. But it's a challenging situation right now. But still, we get a lot of applications, and we will continue to support hydrogen and ammonia projects further as well. I will tell you more about one of those projects, the Egil project, as an example of what we are doing. This is with Orca, owned by Egil Ulvang Rederi. They sent an application in the fall of 2021 to us. We had a lot of dialogue with them also before they sent the application and after they sent the application. That is the way we work, because we believe that this is necessary in order to just to understand the project as good as well as possible, but also to minimize the bureaucracy, because we don't want to have the best application, the best way of writing the application. We want the best for the best project. Sometimes it is not the best writers of applications that have the best project. So there's a lot of dialogue. What we are looking at basically is the innovation height, as we call it. How innovative is the project? That is a plus, to be as innovative as possible. We look at the technology. How is it possible for the technology to address the market and to the potential to reduce the climate gas emissions in a larger scale? Will this demonstration work is that a necessary step in spreading the innovation to the world? And most importantly, really, is the ability to carry out the project. We want to see sound projects with a good plan, with the right people working there, and a plan for financing the project. When we determine the size of the grant, we do a net present value analysis, and we try to minimize the amount of money that the amount of money, so exactly enough for them to make a final investment decision. And we always support the extra costs necessary to reduce the climate gas emissions. We don't support the vessel, the whole costs of the vessel, but only the extra costs. And this project is quite impressive. It is very innovative. As you can see, it's hydrogen powered. That is in itself is innovative, but they have these rotor sails. It's an old idea, and we have supported one ship which is sailing with those sails. Very good experiences with them. Provide a lot of propulsion and also help stabilize the vessel. In addition, they have heat recovery systems. They have organic ranking cycle installed, which converts some of the thermal energy into electricity, etc., etc. So very nice project, but they need hydrogen. And where should they get that from? Of course, they had some ideas about that. But nevertheless, we have been supporting hydrogen hubs. We had a competitive bidding for hydrogen hubs, providing hydrogen for the maritime industry. And we have been providing grant to these 5 projects, which we are really eager to see being starting to be realized. But they have the same challenge as the vessels with increasing costs, and they need to see some more vessels and have offtake agreements in order to define investment decisions. But we are positive. We believe that these hubs will be built. And they could serve up to 35 to 40 vessels. So this is what we are doing in Enova, some examples of that, and I hope that you have some questions and we can have an interesting discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holmen. And I think you raised a lot of really interesting things that I think we can dive into a little bit more in the panel discussion. I can also see that we have some in our audience who are asking questions, more detailed questions also to some of the projects. So if you can find the time to answer those either now or afterwards, I think that would be much appreciated. Listening to you, I think there's a couple of takeaways that I think are relevant for our discussion. I think the first takeaway I had was that looking at how much money Enova spent on the maritime sector last year, roughly 150 million euros a year. I think if we compare that to the 300 million euros a year that Jacob mentioned would be available from the shipping envelope under the ETS, I think it just, and no offense to Norway, it's not the biggest country in Europe. It might be leading in maritime. So if you pull up all of the national resources that could potentially help innovation support, I think you get a number that's significantly larger than what's available at the EU ETS. So definitely something to explore. Where are those opportunities in national funding? I think you also mentioned an important point around the need to have a dialogue with stakeholders, because and I think you said it's not necessarily the project with the best writers that have the best idea, and I think really what you're looking for is to supporting those best projects. I think also very interesting to me to hear how you look at the full value chain. It's not only about the ship, but it's also about having the fuel infrastructure and the hydrogen in this case available. So you need to have a more holistic approach to do this. I think a lot of, and also I like what you said about we're only going to support the extra costs. We're going to give what is needed to get the project off the ground. We're not going to give a lot of money that is not actually needed to those things. So I think some really, really interesting takeaways, and I think maybe we can explore those a little bit more in the debate. And I think the final thing I noticed you said was to evaluate the tech potential. You don't, so quite often when we hear about these things, there's sometimes a debate whether do you reward potential or do you approach everything from a kind of technology neutrality perspective, where you only look at the state of the technology today and not necessarily factor in what can it be in the future. So very interesting to hear that you're really focusing also on the long-term potential of these technologies and how much you can shift the market and reduce emissions. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I think you had this drawing kind of being in the middle between the government, the policymakers, and the companies. And I think I would like to invite now Noël, a policy officer for DG Clima, to join us. I think he can talk a little bit more on the policy side, but also, and Timothée is the policy officer for DG Clima and has been active in the energy and decarbonization debate for almost 20 years. And Tim also holds a degree in engineering and energy systems. So I think you really understand the holistic nature of this whole transition, in addition to being leading work on maritime. So very happy to have you here. But we also have someone who's on the other side of that spectrum, who's actually looking to develop concrete projects that ideally should be commercially viable at least eventually. So we have Billesø, Mads joined DFDS 6 years ago and is currently the head of innovation partnerships. And Mads has previously been a part of Denmark's representation at the IMO. You also have seafaring experience as an officer at Maersk. So you've been around, you understand both sides of, or all sides of this thing. And to kick us off, I would really like to hear from you, Tim, from kind of the Commission's perspective. What role do you see the Innovation Fund play in fostering shipping decarbonization? And maybe also what are the kind of the considerations you have had in designing this, and what are your hopes that this can achieve?
Thank you for the question, and good morning to all participants, and thanks to the Global Maritime Forum and TNE for organizing that important event on the Innovation Fund. As it was explained by Jakob earlier, the Innovation Fund is an extremely important instrument for the EU. It has a large budget, and it's an important instrument to complement the other policies that we have in place, or that we will have in place at the EU, to ensure that we follow a trajectory in terms of emissions reduction in line with our objective to become climate neutral by 2050. What I wanted to say is that the Innovation Fund is already supporting shipping. So we have already supported a couple of projects in the maritime transport sector, mostly small-scale project. But if you look at the outcome of the last small-scale call, you see that we have one project like to support a pusher boat with a fuel cell. We have another project that looks at producing marine fuel based on sugar oil, or we also have a project using wind propulsion assistance. So it's already possible now to get support for this type of project under the Innovation Fund. But it's clear that the revision of the ETS will definitely increase the support of the Innovation Fund for the sector. And as it was mentioned by Jakob earlier, it's now clear that the scope has been extended to explicitly cover projects, so contributing to the decarbonization of the sector, and including through dedicated topics in future call. And as it was also said, the aim is to use 20 million EU allowances that could worth around 1.6 billion euro to support the sector by 2030. We have also defined specific criteria that should be taken into account when looking at projects in that sector, typically to look at the whole climate impact of those projects, including reduction in terms of black carbon emissions, but also looking at the impact of the projects on other environmental aspects like increasing biodiversity or reducing noise and water pollution. This is something that is also important to us. And very importantly, now the Innovation Fund in the past used to only be based on grants. And as it was also explained by Jakob, now we have this new funding instrument, auctioning, that could take a different shape. It's kind of a new funding instrument for the fund. We will launch the first experience by the end of the year supporting production of hydrogen. That could, by the way, benefit also the sectors, because green hydrogen could well be used to produce green ammonia that could then be used in the maritime transport sector. So we also need to be to think also in a holistic manner, and not to consider that a wide diversity of projects could also, be beneficial for the sectors, not only the one that would be really tagged maritime transport sector. Like you said before, Kasper, we need to look at the overall value chain. Then, in terms of what could the fund support in terms of innovation, I would say at the moment, if you look at how the Innovation Fund is described in the EU legislation, it's quite open. So basically, it could support, of course, the use of alternative fuels by supporting their production, by supporting the relevant engines and propulsion technologies on board vessels, but also supporting eventually the infrastructures that needs to be there in place to ensure the distribution. But it's also possible, according to the description of the Innovation Fund, to look at possible support for electrification, support energy efficiency, retrofitting, innovation import, all that is somehow open. In the past, if you look at past calls from the Innovation Fund, they tend to be more technology agnostic. So leaving the possibility for market actors to come up with the best idea and to demonstrate throughout their application that their proposal with the proposed technology will be the one that would have the most added value in terms of using public finance.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I think one question maybe for your next intervention is, for a shipping company or a maritime stakeholder that wishes to kind of follow the innovation funds and the different calls, what's your best recommendation to stay abreast on what's coming? So maybe for the next round. But also, again, I think very important point around the holistic nature of this, how the innovation fund, if and when it supports, say, hydrogen or other potential fuel, that will also have an innovation spillover on the maritime industry, hopefully help bring down the cost and scale up the production. So we shouldn't only focus on the narrow shipping envelope, but also that broader transition. I think that's a very important point. I would now like to turn to Mads, because I know you have been involved in this, and it would be great to hear from you as a company who's investing heavily in decarbonization projects and who has an experience dealing with public funding agency. What are your takeaways? What have you learned? What can you recommend to other stakeholders? And perhaps what are your recommendations to policymakers if they want really this to have the maximum impact as we move forward?
Yeah, thank you, Kasper, and thanks for the great presentations to start with. We're very happy to be here. That we have some experience from the funding large-scale projects. We applied for the first round for a hydrogen-powered vessel, 23 megawatt fuel cell-powered vessel, the Oslo-Copenhagen ferry. And we applied for this in the second round for ammonia vessels sailing in inter-European trades. So we have some experience in the application process. To begin with, it was not focused on. Oh, are you still here?
Yeah, we lost you for a second, but it seems like you're back. So
yeah.
If you can spotlight Mads again.
Yes. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I left you shortly, but we have some experience in these application processes. As I said, to start with, it was not focused on maritime. We kind of tried to get in under the energy intensive industries and try to kind of work around that. Now it is much more focused on maritime, and I believe it will be a lot easier for our sector to do applications in the future here. Main thing here is also that very important for us is that it's both covering capex and opex. For these projects, opex is even more important than support for the capex part. Normally we say that we need cooperation, we need the suppliers, we need the customers, we need us in the middle as operators, and we need public support as well to do these projects. Yeah, you can say that we have picked the low-hanging fruits for a while now. Now we need to get the really juicy ones at the top of the tree, and we need someone to hold the ladder for us. And there these support systems and the support from organizations around us are very, very important. Otherwise, it is a kind of a team effort to make an application for these large funds. That goes for national funding, also for the EU funding. And we have support from technical personnel, from tax and revenue, and organizations around us. For the last application, we had 15 to 20 internal employees working on the application. And then we had support from externals as well, both consultancy and also supplier. That said, I would say that it is like designing a vessel. you need to deliver the same work anyway. You just need to explain it in a different way that evaluators can understand and of course choose you in the end. Really important as well is also that if you don't win the prize, there's also the project development assistance possible, and we won that on both of the projects, both the hydrogen project first round, where we have worked with the European Investment Bank and Rambøll, Roland Berger, to improve the application and the concept development. And we had the same for the ammonia vessels, and that have been a great experience and at a really good support of our efforts in this space.
And Mads, could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on what is the project development assistance? What is that for those who are unaware?
It is kind of a consultancy support. When you get the evaluation back, you have some shortcomings, you have some things that can be improved. And that is then being highlighted and supported by external consultancies that kind of know the business and can help you kind of mature that. For the first one, primarily it was the maturity of the project, and that is also really important. That it may be under the innovation fund, but there needs to be a balance between the innovation and the maturity. So you need to kind of cover both, that it's not TRL level, really low TRL level from the beginning and going to 9, but it is somewhat mature on some of the aspects at least. What you get support for is mainly the kind of the innovative part, as Rune also said, that it is the new part. It's not the construction of the hull. It is kind of for our projects, it's the propulsion system, it's the fuel storage and so on. But it is really important to have that balance in the projects to make sure that it's not lower the risk of the project to succeed, and also be able to deliver the project within a reasonable time.
So it seems like you have to fit that sweet spot between being innovative but still being something that you can deliver. I think also my takeaway from what you say is that it is quite a lot of work. There is support in this process, but you should approach it as a real project that will take resources to be successful. And I also really like this idea of working together with others that you have. And I think maybe this is a good segue to you, Rune, because of course the maritime sector is only just one part of the energy transition. And how does your work on green shipping fit into the broader work on kind of the larger Norwegian strategy for decarbonization? How do you see the general energy transition and shipping's energy transition? How do you see they're related? What are the potential synergies? And are there some conflicts that you're looking at?
Well, maritime shipping represents something like 3% of the global emissions, and in Norway it's a bit more than that, around 7%. But still, we use something like 30% of our budget on maritime transport. And the reason for that, in our view, is that Norway is quite unique, we think, or the maritime sector in Norway is quite unique. We have the full value chain, we have everything from banks and shipbuilders and technology developers and ship owners and a lot of maritime transport in Norway as well. So in our view, we see that with supporting the maritime sector, the Norwegian maritime sector, we are able to do more than just reducing the climate gas emissions in Norway. We can be in many ways a demonstration hub for the rest of the world, and that's our take on it, and that's why we spend so much money on the maritime sector.
Thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe Jacob, and I'll go back to a little bit to a discussion or a question we had last week when we had a webinar on Fuel EU Maritime. And here one of the speakers from NG talked about the importance of aligning and ensuring consistency across the measures that are targeting the energy system as well as the shipping industry. And I can see some of the questions in the chat touch upon some of the same in terms of how green does green hydrogen need to be in order to be to fulfill those criteria. What's kind of the assessment of emissions, and how do we ensure that those are the same so different stakeholders are not optimizing for different targets? So can you say a little bit of this important, and also how you from Transport Environment dealing with a broad portfolio of activities, how do you see the synergies between the general energy transition and the need for new fuels for shipping?
Yeah, thanks, Kasper. So I think it's it's a difficult question. I think really the point is, and I put this in chat, is it's about a holistic approach. As I mentioned in the presentation, what I think every transition shows really is that you can never just have one silver bullet, right? So the ETS alone cannot decarbonize the society in an efficient and cost-effective way. You really need these different parts of the puzzle to come together, and that's why all of these different pieces, from market measures like carbon prices to command and control measures, and also innovation policy, are so useful. I mean, I think that a couple of things maybe to say is that I think we were very impressed by Enova and the kind of work that they're doing in terms of you know, from the conversations we've had in the past, Rune, about how essentially Norway has realized that they do have a competitive advantage in a lot of maritime technology. So the point is really to hone in on that, to make sure they kind of they support that, so that they can sell to the rest of the world. And this is really, I think, something that Europe needs to consider in terms of being really into the detail of what Europe can do and what it can do very well. And in the maritime sector, I think there's a lot of potential that we have in Europe. And I think we really need to kind of use innovation policy in particular to do what we're best at. And, you know, and again, the thing that from Enova, that they're only supporting hydrogen and ammonia projects and not, for example, methanol projects, because, you know, the bunkering is already quite simple. We're not talking about innovation there. It can be done. And I think this is something that Europe really should take note, because, and member states as well, because it is a complex picture, is about really focusing on, you know, the context is we've never really been fan of this technology neutral approach. We think what we really need to do is look into the future, look to see quite clearly where we will be in 20, 30 years. And in terms of fuels, that really means renewable fuels of non-biological origin. So it doesn't mean biofuels. It means a sustainable and scalable e-fuels like hydrogen and ammonia. And really the public authority needs to concentrate on that, because that is then what you're going to sell to the rest of the world, right? That is where you're going to make industry the best. And so that's, you know, really crystal clear where your support needs to be. So maybe I'll just do that point. But so innovation policy is really, really useful as part of this wider policy, but this puzzle, but it needs to be on point.
Thank you, Jacob. And I think you raised an important point that innovation policy is not only about decarbonization, it's also about industrial policy. What are the strong points of a region or country that you can really leverage and where you have a competitive advantage? So making those two work in tandem, I think will also improve this. And I think you also raised an interesting point around what are the kind of that difference between kind of technology agnostic and then kind of technology potential. And I think maybe to go to you, Tim, I think within European innovation policy, this has been a long-standing debate. I think the European Commission, kind of the mission-driven approach to innovation, where you kind of go out and set those long-term targets, and then you really direct this funding to support those things, versus the more traditional, the technology agnostic. How do you see that debate play out also in the space around shipping? And the second question I have for you was building a little bit on something Jacob said early around being targeted, like where will we get the most bang for the buck? And I think within the Getting to Zero coalition, but I think also wider, there's a lot of interest in the concept around green corridors as a way of starting building up the first nodes in a network of zero emission fuels. And how do you see green corridors, contract for difference, innovation fund funding play together to find some of those low-hanging fruits where we can really demonstrate some of these technologies in practice? A lot of questions. You can start from where you want to.
Yeah, I mean, first I would like just to highlight the fact that indeed, I mean, innovation policy is not standalone measures. What we need to decarbonize the sector is the basket of measures. We've been speaking about the ETS, but the ETS is only one of the measures put forward in by the EU in order to reduce shipping emissions. But there are others, like the Fuel EU maritime regulation, that will be there really to ensure that there is an uptake of alternative fuel to create a demand. On the supply side, we've got the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive with specific objective in terms of the production of renewable energy sources. We also have the revision of the alternative fuel infrastructure directive. So that's, again, we need to see the whole puzzle together and not just say that, you know, the change and the shift in operation or in the use of alternative fuel will only come from innovation policy or the ETS. We clearly have in mind that we need, an overall basket of policies at EU, but hopefully also in a short period of time, also coming from global measures as well. Now, it's a very good question that you raised. Technology agnostic versus trying to more focus the use of public money towards specific solutions, specific fuels, specific technologies. I think at this stage, we are collecting information. We have just organized yesterday a stakeholder event to also understand what stakeholders from the shipping community has in mind in terms of priority for finance, and how do they see the role of the Innovation Fund in supporting the transition. So we are at this stage of where we collect information. We are currently preparing the next call. And we will have to take all this feedback into account, also the very interesting feedback that was presented today by Enova. I think that's also very useful information. I think one of the challenge that we'll have to take into account in terms of auctioning and the use of competitive bidding is the ability of the market really to get a competition between different market actors, because the aim of competitive bidding is really to ensure that we use in the best possible way EU funding is to distribute financial support. It's also about de-risking projects and leveraging private capital, but this works really if there are sufficient bidders. So that's also things that we need to assess, and based on this assessment, I think we will see how to best design the next call. And I will also put in the chat the link to the CINEA website. CINEA is the EU agency that is directly dealing with the implementation of the Innovation Fund. And that's the place where stakeholders can have the latest information about future calls for proposals.
Thank you, Tim. And I think I really like what you say about you're using all of the tools in the policy toolbox. It's not just one instrument in isolation. They have to work together. And I think, and we had a really in-depth discussion of this last week, where we deep dived into Fuel EU Maritime, but also some of those other legislative proposals. I can see there are a couple of questions in the chat related to Fuel EU Maritime and how that is going to impact. I can also strongly recommend the recording and the slides from that webinar. I think there's a lot of really interesting points, and I can see Fake, who did the presentation last week, this year, and strong support for this. I think there's a lot of learning in terms of what will be the impact of this. I also like what you said, Tim, around dialogue. Like a lot of this, and I think you're kind of echoing what Rune also said, it's important to have a dialogue with the stakeholders around what are the real high impact things, and I think that the Commission is doing a really good job of reaching out and getting that input, so you're designing on the best available knowledge, and there's that invitation to dialogue that we've also heard from other representatives from DG Move and elsewhere. And I think it's really up to industry stakeholders and groups to really use that to inform that decision-making process. We're almost running out of time, but I want to give you, Mads, the final word, because you're actually working from one of the companies that have to put real money on the plate to make this happen. So if you could ask for a maximum of 3 things from the EU Innovation Fund, what would those be for those next calls that are coming up to implement it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think to at least approve one of the maritime projects that are in the pool now, that would be a good start. I think we're on a good track. I totally agree with the technology agnostic approach, and also the wide range of green fuels that are available, that we are not focusing on one only, but actually take into consideration all of them. The future will be multi-fuel. There will be different fuels available and different fuels suited for different purposes. So I think a lot of the uncertainty is around the choice of fuel. We can't make an LNG choice again. That we can't afford that. So that is definitely an input there. But I would very much like to see a maritime project for the third round.
So fingers crossed that we will see real action in real life, getting some of those technologies. And I think Rune also, what we're really not praying, but hoping that some of the projects that you have been supported, that we will see those vessels into operation. I think one of the things that we learned through the work of the Getting to Zero Coalition is really seeing is believing. And I think once we start seeing those ships in real operations, I think that will really change the mindset across and really make it feel like this is doable. And again, I think also having that vocal public support from policymakers to make that move. And I think, Sam, I would just like to echo your hope that soon we'll see something at the global level that again can create this confidence that this transition is going to happen and that the policymakers will support with the tools that they have in their toolbox. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and your knowledge and openly. It's been really interesting. I can see a lot of there's a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll follow up on those and see if we can provide all of that information. I think it just goes to show that there's a lot of interest from stakeholders to be part of this transition, which I find super encouraging. So thank you for joining. Thank you for this, and then fingers crossed that we'll see something good coming out of the IMO in July. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you.